All right, good afternoon, everybody. This is the pretrial processes work group. This was set over, I believe, I'm not sure I was present in our last hearing. Oh, there's Judge Garrett. So I'm going to turn it over to her once she connects. And you're still muted, Judge Garrett.
Okay, is that better? I guess not. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, good. Okay. I'm sorry. I'm having trouble getting this set up. So I can definitely see Judge Freeman, but I don't know who else is in our meeting. Have we? Oh, okay. No, never mind. I got the screen. Okay. Hi, everybody. How y'all doing? Yeah, Mets. Okay. Well, we have our agenda for today is pretty simple. It's to discuss the future of the pretrial services unit and how we might integrate that with some of the other pretrial services that are now being offered that were not when we started the pretrial services unit. We also want to look at some of the numbers for people who've been served by the pretrial services unit and get some sense of who's succeeding and who's not, what are the common attributes of each of those groups of people. And I don't see that Dave Reynolds is with us yet, but I hope he will be soon because he's a source of some of those numbers. Although Andrew Peterson, I understand that you and Dave Graham and Dave Reynolds have talked about some of those numbers. Where are you on your calculations, Andrew? I know you've been somewhat pressed for time and probably haven't done as much as you'd wanted, but where are you on that?
Yeah, I apologize for not having anything ready. I admit I think I was a bit optimistic in being able to get it done by this meeting. But I had a streak of bad luck with some viruses and some other things going on. But right now I'm almost done recreating all of the PSA scores for all the cases filed since September 2019 through the end of 2022. I have all the elements there, except the only one that's tricky, and this is just one that's difficult in general. I'm sure Alan knows this, deals with it all the time, is figuring out the prior incarceration of individuals, who gets the scored for that. So I'm almost done with that. I anticipate being done with that today, and then the next big step would be integrating the jail data that we have, so we can know who was on some kind of release during the pretrial period. So we're not just scoring people as having succeeded when they were incarcerated the whole time. So that's kind of where I am. I anticipate another week or so probably to be done with that. If everything, even with a couple of hiccups, I think a week is reasonable. And so from there, I'd like to, I kind of realized that it wasn't a good idea to rush us in general, because these numbers I think could have some import to the group. And so it would be good to maybe do some kind of preliminary review with stakeholders here and folks that have a better sense of the policies and practices in place, so that I'm not making bad inferences, or we can recognize specific circumstances that may have occurred in Whatcom but don't necessarily show up in the data that I'm seeing, and so that the results reflect those and give a better picture. So I think that's a good plan or a plan that makes sense, maybe before the next meeting, where that we can talk, and then in the next meeting talk about the results that we see and what we think they might mean.
Well, if we extend the deadline out there, and I agree with you that this is not a job that should be rushed, because this is basically the information we need to figure out whether pretrial services is working on the levels that we want. If we extend the deadline for that out to the next meeting, or actually we'd probably want to hear from you in written form like a week before the next meeting, so we all have time to digest the numbers that you give us. If we do that, will that also permit you to do some analysis of the results of the PSA, and which qualities on the PSA are predictive of success or of non-success?
Yeah, I think so. I think so. And again, I have sometimes optimistic to a fault, but I think that's likely. And that's something that I'll know well ahead of time. The issues with the data and issues with being sick, I couldn't always predict, but this one I should be more easy to predict. How long that should take, and I don't think that's. I think that's reasonable to have that done by then.
Okay. It seems to me that we can proceed with discussion today in general terms, but as we work to figure out the direction that we want to see pretrial services, that unit, go, the statistical information we get from you, Dr. Peterson, is going to be real important to that decision. So our agenda today is not going to be to make any decisions, but simply to talk about where we are and where we think we'd like to go. But I would like to get that statistical information from you in enough time that at our next meeting, which is going to be the first Friday in June, that we can, really get down to some real specifics. Alan Epps, let me just ask you, how do you feel about that? And how are things going for you now? When we met last time, you talked about perhaps wanting to have more people referred to pretrial services, and perhaps changing the criteria for levels of supervision because you felt you could absorb more. Where are you on that now?
Really no change since last time we spoke. I haven't gotten many referrals, to be quite honest, in a couple of weeks. I've maintained my same caseload for a while now. I'm looking at it right here, kind of in the background as we're discussing this. I have 58 active cases, and now and those are split with, looks like 21 medium, 16 high, and 8 in the low category. And as you know, low category is pretty basic. They check in with the office. They either phone or in person. I get a good number, a good contact number, a good email address, and a home address. And then it's basically just text reminders after that for court that go out automatically. Medium and high, I try to contact those people more frequently. But I guess what I'm getting at is I can handle a lot more, and I haven't gotten referrals in quite some time now.
Dave Freeman, Judge Freeman, do you have any insights about why that might be, or what we can do to increase the caseload there?
Yeah, I think we can talk to the commissioners. I can certainly understand the last 2 weeks, however, because we've had pro tems covering those calendars for the past 2 weeks.
Oh, really?
We had judicial conference where all the commissioners attended last week, and then this week we have 2 commissioners out sick. So I'm not sure. I was covering some of the commissioner calendars, not first appearances, but I think we primarily had pro tems on those first appearances.
Okay. Yeah, it sounds like, Alan's there ready to do the job, and clearly there are people who need pretrial services and can be beneficially referred there. Adam, anything you'd like to add to that?
I have been giving a lot of thought to the nature of the pretrial services or assessment tool, and actually like what exactly are we capturing, and like what's going on in Whatcom County, and then like what services are offered through pretrial services. And it just seems like to me, from my perspective, and in thinking about the populations that we're serving with LEAD, a lot of homelessness, a lot of people that don't have cell phones, don't know how to access cell phones, don't have housing. And they're cycling in and out of the criminal justice system due to those kind of victimized circumstances, and which are disproportionate based on race as well. So it's almost, and I remember there was a meeting a few months back, maybe last year, where Andrew had mentioned, we were talking about the tool, and Andrew had assured us that it doesn't really have, we couldn't see if there was a bias based on race, based on the data. So my question is, what specifically are we seeing in the data that tells us that? Because if we're just, failure to appear because you're homeless, because you don't have a cell phone, because you don't have the tools to even utilize the pretrial services, disproportionate based on race, are we just reinforcing that stigma, that those issues based on race that are already there? So that was something that I've been wondering about, doing a lot of research on, because still in Whatcom County, Native and African Americans are, still the rate is being arrested, or I remember charged or arrested 6% at a rate 6% more than white people. And I know African Americans alone are only 1.3% of Whatcom County's population. So it's, these are big issues. So, and if the tool is, just how Andrew was seeing that there wasn't any racial bias there in the tool.
Well, I can answer part of it, and then I'm going to refer the rest to Andrew. But it was pointed out to me recently, which is why I'm very aware of the comparison, that the information about the bias in our process has been related to, of the group of people who are charged with crimes, and of the people who utilize pretrial services, is there any racial or ethnic disparity there? And, in terms of success rates, the answer thus far has been no. But you're right in that when you look at, the group of people who've been charged with crimes, right there, that's a selection from the general population. And our pretrial services group has never focused on that aspect of things, because who is arrested and prosecuted is not a decision that our group can affect. That's a prosecutorial discretion issue. And I learned recently of the disparity between the percentage of the population that's African American and the percentage of the population that is to a lesser degree Hispanic, and the disparate rates there. And for Native people too, although our numbers on Native people are complex, because the jail also incarcerates Native American people who've been convicted by the Lummi Court. So those numbers are going to be inflated, and that doesn't necessarily reflect discrimination or disparity. But I just want to sort of clarify that there's a limit to what our group can do in terms of disparate charging of people, because our group and the courts don't have any discretion in selecting who is charged. That's something that the prosecutor does. But I agree that it's a serious problem, and you're right. It reflects the problems in society and the disparity in opportunities in our larger society. So anyway, I think that ultimately the issues of who's prosecuted are not going to be something that our group can deal with. but for whoever's prosecuted, making sure that pretrial services are pertinent and available to everybody on an if not an equal basis, on a basis that promotes equality and outcome, I think is a better way to put it. That definitely is our mission. Sorry, I turned that into a little speech. I didn't mean to.
No,
Andrew,
no.
do you want to address Adam's question about numbers to the extent that
And just
that we can?
to refine my comment and question for this group particularly, it's, you know, to address if that's the selection that, as you said, that's you know, that is engaging with pretrial services, then how is are the services through pretrial services actually addressing the, you know, the disparity in those issues? Is it
fact of the
addressing
disparity.
homelessness and you know, if we're just giving calls and emails to people that don't have computers and cell phones, you know, that doesn't really hit the mark. You know, when people are just dealing with homelessness every day and like what they're going to eat, you know, I'm not showing up to court. So
I understand. And while we're not able to address the issue of who is selected for prosecution, we certainly are able to address the issue of how do we provide services on a basis that promotes equality, and that may not be equal services, but our goal is equality in the system. So, Andrew, what are your thoughts?
Sure. So, yeah, thank you, Adam. It's a good question, and it's one
Sure
that
is.
we need
Yeah.
some, you know, that it covers a lot of area, right? And I don't want risk assessments to be kind of spread into like all these areas, because they're not. They're very narrow. When we talk about disproportionality, disparity and bias in tools, it's not about necessarily who is being prosecuted or even arrested. It's more about how people are classified and risk levels. And that's where we see it. I don't want to quote anything because I don't have the research in front of me, but the tool has been evaluated dozens of times by different entities, and they haven't found racial bias in it. So let me go back to those studies and put something together, and I can send it out to the group on what specifically that is and what that means, just so we all are all working from the same material.
So
Judge Garrett,
the best
could
way,
I,
Adam, is hold that question and ask it again when we've got the numbers, because it is an important question, and it's one that should be coming up frequently as we evaluate all this. So thanks. Yeah.
Judge Garrett, could I interject a question?
You bet.
I've been away for a couple of weeks and maybe I missed something, but the kind of data that Adam's referring to and that you even referenced, Judge Garrett, is something that, for instance, Barry and I, working on implementing the needs assessment report, are trying to be really sensitive to. I have not seen data like that in your quarterly reports for LEAD, Adam, or elsewhere. So I'm wondering where this data is, and it, you know, if
the
Data about what? Adam, you're muted.
data about the disparities in arrests and in charging decisions and so forth.
So the disparity that appears to be on racial or ethnic lines.
Yes.
Yeah.
From were you asking me, Stephen, where I got that data from?
Well, you mentioned that, and then Judge Garrett said she had recently seen data that seemed to corroborate that. So obviously it's floating around someplace, but some of us who are trying to pay attention to that, and I don't know, maybe Barry has seen it also, but I'm just saying I haven't, and I'm interested in looking at that.
Yeah, I'm fortunate enough right now and for this group to be in my master's program for social work, so I'm constantly diving into this data and writing papers on it. So but yeah, I mean, the census, you know, Whatcom County, you know, the racial breakdown and the incarceration rates, I mean, they're all out there in various websites, and they all seem to show, you know, this disproportionate arrest and charging and conviction of, you know, people based on race. So if you want if it, Stephen, I can send you all the resources that I've looked into, that I kind of just keep a running note list, so I can send you any of those resources if you want.
I'd appreciate seeing anything you have, Adam. Thank you.
And Stephen, just to interject on your question, we went over some of that data yesterday, remember, in our planning meeting where Holly and Marty had done a recent data poll within for 21 and 22.
Yeah,
And then they were going to try to get us the raw data that went into that to their slide. So maybe that's forthcoming as well.
okay.
Okay,
And if I could add one other comment, Judge Garrett,
sure.
I'm gonna disagree a little bit. Maybe this work group can't do a lot about prosecutorial discretion and law enforcement, but the task force certainly can, and do much about is certainly limited to an advisory body. But I think raising the visibility of what we're seeing, the continuation of those disparities, is something that the task force can shine some light on, and I hope translate that into some pressure for rethinking practices that are just continuing old ways of doing things.
I think that's true. And we'll see where the data gets us. But I think that ultimately, Adam's right that the especially vulnerable groups, people who, well, especially people who don't have housing, but also just people who are poor, we're going to find that certain ethnic groups are overrepresented in those groups, and those are the groups that are vulnerable to to being prosecuted. So ultimately it comes back to complex issues like housing that our task force or our work group doesn't have any sway on, which is not to say, oh, so we should just throw up our hands and forget about it because we can't do anything. I don't mean that. I think that you're right, Stephen, when you say, people who can do something about those problems should be serenaded from all sides about what we're all seeing in terms of disparities and the reasons why. So I just, I want us to be realistic in our expectations, but that's not to say that we should give up. Yeah, by any means. That's why we're here. Carol, what do you think about all this? Anything you'd like to add? Not at this point. Okay. And I don't know, Judge Freeman, anything you'd like to add about how things are going at the court currently? Any updates for us that we ought to know about?
Not particularly. I don't think there's been a whole lot of change as far as numbers. I did not review the aging report this week, but I don't imagine it would have had substantial change. I will say one thing stemming off of what Adam said about the risk assessment tool, and I agree, because some of those things can have, if you have bad inputs, you're going to get bad outputs, and it's one point that I've made before with Stephen, I think, is that that's why there has to be an element of discretion still, and that the risk assessment tool isn't meant to tell us this person should be detained or this person shouldn't. It's supposed to give us a risk assessment. It's supposed to point us in the right direction when it comes to pretrial services. But when you see somebody that, let's say, a couple of years ago had a string of trespass cases and a lot of FTAs, but they haven't in the last year or two, it's a pretty good indicator that they might have been dealing with a houseless issue during that period. And that's where the discretion comes in as well, because you can weigh those FTAs for what they are, and that's a period where the person might not have had a stable place to live, could have had other issues going on. But again, that's why there has to be that element of discretion as well, because you can filter some of that information that may not be captured in the risk assessment.
Yeah, that's absolutely. And that will always be the case, that judicial discretion is what it's all about. Yeah. Carol, I see that you have, I actually saw your hand there for once. Go ahead.
Thanks. I'm slow to think of what my questions are. So, Adam, correct me if I got this wrong, but I heard you not only raising a question about the risk assessment, but also asking the question of whether our pretrial services unit might be able to provide more services that might more effectively meet people where they're at, especially folks who are living without housing, without basic needs, or without phones to receive the text reminders. And I appreciate some of the disparity questions need to wait until we have more data, but if we're looking at the potential for the pretrial services unit, I would love to hear more of your thoughts of what kinds of services or issues might possibly be addressed by that unit that might add to their usefulness.
Yeah, and thank you. I think also, I know Alan had his hand up a while ago, so I know a lot of, if you have it, if you want to jump in at any point as well. But yeah, obviously would lead coming from that aspect, just try to tailoring our services to the needs of the population, which is really just pointing people in the direction and really advocating for them for those needs like housing, food, clothing, showers, those basic things. I mean, we've had grants for hotel stays, which we've been very lucky to assist people with, and that level of that housing first model, that level of stability. So I also think that it's something that Judge Freeman said is, when you get this score from a risk assessment, yes, the discretion is good to have that there. But then I feel like a score, there's something somebody said in a talk about this topic, but it was basically like number of, actually I have it here, but a number of crimes, number of failure to appears, these things are almost just a proxy for race. So when you get that score, it almost influences the decision of the judicial officer to reinforce that bias. That could be based on race. So yeah, to answer your question, Carol, too, I think it's just looking at the population that is being qualified for or making it through that risk assessment, these pretrial services, and asking that. I know Alan mentioned in a previous meeting, he's asked people what they need and they've tailored their services, but is it really addressing housing and all those other like basic, Maslow's hierarchy of needs thing, that base foundation of like, what do people need to just survive so I can even think about going to court? Because yeah, with what was it, a 60% failure rate, in pretrial services, it's like changing what we do. Not because we, like Judge Garrett said, we can't change the housing, we can't change Whatcom County as a whole, but the services that pretrial services provide, maybe we could change that. So
Yeah, those are good points. And I think we absolutely need to do that with our pretrial services. In the past, we've taken much more of we started in a really different environment, and monitoring people for pretrial success, in other words, not committing new crimes, especially, and also coming to court, was really key, and also realistic expectations for a fairly large segment of the group that we're serving. Not so much anymore. And so I think you're right, Adam, and Alan too, that our services need to change accordingly. Alan, I see you've got your hand up. Would you like to elaborate on this?
I didn't have my hand raised necessarily to elaborate because I wasn't prepared with any of those numbers, but I did pose another question of if pretrial rates are a 60% failure, I guess I'd want to compare that to the national average of failure to appears before we start saying that Whatcom is way off base. Because if the national average is 60 or 50 or 70, then I don't think we need to raise all these red flags and start changing all of our services. We just need to, we kind of, like you were saying, it's a different clientele, it's a different climate now. We kind of just need to get through this. But I'd want to compare us to the national averages before I
Yeah,
think
that's a
we
good
make any
point.
changes.
Although it doesn't alter the fact that whether we're pretty typical or whether we're outliers, we still know that we need to meet people where they are and serve their actual needs rather than necessarily the needs that we defined 5 years ago when we embarked on this. So, you know, we'll get there step by step, but we're figuring it out. Now, somebody else had their hand up, and now I'm not seeing. I'm not very good at seeing hands. I'm sorry. Does somebody else have something to add? If so,
Yeah.
wave your hand so I can see you.
It was me, Judge Garrett. I think the conversation.
What was you, Andrew? There we
Yeah,
go.
it's
Okay.
kind of moved past, so I'll hold and just let the conversation continue.
Well, I'll jump in then. You know, starting at the last meeting, and there was a little side exchange of email initiated by Dave Reynolds, musing about the possibility of closer integration between pretrial services and the LEAD program. And when we're talking about disadvantages and communication obstacles with homeless people and therefore with a racially disparate population, pretrial services is sitting back in an office in a relatively passive kind of communication relationship. But the LEAD folks, Adam and others, are out on the streets actually engaging with people. And so, being able to connect with people for whom there are communication barriers and as well as service barriers makes that even more of a reasonable approach to sort of interweave the services of pretrial services unit and LEAD case managers. To me, I mean, it seems like that's even a more compelling case for that kind of collaboration.
Good point. Jake, is there anything you'd like to add? We haven't heard from you yet, and we may not need to, but
No, well, we service only, misdemeanor, gross misdemeanor crimes from district and municipal courts. So it's a little bit different. And we don't do a risk assessment to determine who should come to us. They're given to us from the judges. So we take what we are given, and then we do an assessment, a risk assessment on pretrial cases to determine frequency of reporting, basically, is the reason for our risk assessment. And those reporting, that occurs multiple different ways, whether it's we meet them in the courts when we go out to the courts, over the phone, in person. It kind of depends again on their needs and what we can provide for them. And the conditions we get are pretty much black and white. The judge puts them in place. We need to follow them, whether it's good behavior, check-ins, texts, UAs, some of the devices we have that we're now working with for alcohol monitoring, those type of things. But what we, I guess what makes us a little different too is we have those divisions in our department where, if we screen for, high-risk DV, we'll monitor them on a DV case though on pretrial, or if there's behavioral health needs, we'll put them on our behavioral health unit and work with them there. And in those situations, yeah, we have the black and white conditions that we have to monitor, but we can also incorporate, to meet some of those needs that we're talking about here, depending on where they're at. And sometimes we get a direct referral on the pretrial release that says behavioral health unit. And so then we can spend a little more time and work with them, connect them to LEAD. Very often we do work there. But, we're set up a little bit differently, but we try to kind of do the best to meet kind of where you guys are talking in the middle there. And yes, we have the conditions we meet, got to make sure they're met. And then, but we kind of try to assist outside the box a little bit too, as much as we can. So I don't know if that's helpful or if that just kind of shines a light a little bit different, what else is out there.
thanks. That makes me think about one thing, and that is pretrial services is at a disadvantage because the court can't order people to do things that would be imposed in sentencing unless they feel they're convicted of the crime.
Right.
Treatment. However,
yeah.
People that aren't succeeding on pretrial services, in other words, they've missed court hearings or they've been charged with new crimes or something like that. Participating in services can't be ordered, but it can be given as an option, an alternative to what would otherwise be a sanction for failure to appear or for committing a new crime. So we may have some leeway in there, some way to sort of take advantage of the crisis of people not succeeding in pretrial service. I mean, it's at such a high level, but that may be an opportunity also. I don't know, but it seems like it's worth thinking about. Alan, what are your thoughts? Oh, or Jake, why don't you?
I was just gonna say, we do see that, you know, when we go back before the court because they're struggling and they need mental health, they need inpatient or whatever service it might be. But you know, then we go to court and say, well, we're looking at, you know, incarceration or what other options are, but it typically has to be agreed upon by all parties to be able to enforce that as part of a pretrial conditions. But that certainly is a platform that could be used or has been used for some individuals. Sorry to
And I'm just
interrupt
thinking
there.
for people that have, well, I'll just say failed at
Mhm.
pretrial services, either with a new crime or failure to appear. You know, if the option for services is given as an alternative to incarceration, suddenly there's an incentive that wasn't there. Of course, incarceration has to
Certainly.
actually be a potential in
Right.
order for, I mean, it's complicated, but to think about anyway. Alan, did you want to go further than that?
I'll hold my question for just a second. I think Judge Freeman had a question just a moment ago.
Oh, I didn't see Dave. You have a
that's
question,
okay.
a comment?
Look, I'm a little leery on compelling treatment pretrial, but just based on some experience in municipal courts over the years. But that brought up a question I had for Jake, which is, you know, Superior Court's struggling right now as far as pretrial and our ability to really enforce any conditions right now. I can imagine that that's even tougher in the municipal and district courts because of booking restrictions.
Yeah.
How are the courts dealing with that when there are violations? Because my understanding is that they're still not going to be incarcerated, that they won't be booked.
Sure. So sometimes there is, like, you know, a cash performance bond bill that they would impose. They typically are now giving more time for them to post that if it gets to that level. We're seeing a higher use of the like TAD and SoberLink scram devices when there are alcohol violations. We see sometimes increased UA reports. They're coming in here a couple times a week, sometimes breath tests or increased reporting to check in, whether that's in person or over the phone. You know, I guess Bellingham Municipal Court does, you know, for violation of no contact order, they do some active GPS monitoring over there. Those are some of the probably most common resolutions we'll see with pretrial violations, I guess.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Well, I think that line of thinking is one that we should all think about over the next couple of weeks and think about how we can sort of change the direction of pretrial services to be more responsive to the needs of the people it serves and how we might set up those incentives. And for me, that covers what we need to address today. Others, comments or other things you'd like to add?
Go
Yeah.
piggybacking on what Jake was saying, and Jake, I don't want to put you on the spot because you probably didn't come with a bunch of numbers. But so if one of the issues that pretrial addresses or is having problems with is the contact issue, you know, not having a phone, not having home, stable housing, things like that. What is the similarity between Superior Court and District Court? Is District Court going through that same thing? Are you having trouble contacting people? Are you having trouble getting a hold of them? Because I don't imagine our clientele is that extremely different, to be honest. I think there is differences, obviously, felonies versus non, but I would imagine the clientele is similar and we have the same roadblocks.
I would say our main roadblock is when they don't report initially, and then we don't have that initial contact. Once we get them in the door and can get that contact and get all their best information, if we discover that the phone's not going to work, then, you know, we'll meet with them here. We go to the small town, you know, Blaine and Everson CMS, all those places, we'll meet them out there. We'll do what we can. But I think, you know, obviously sometimes they just choose not to report. We can't do much about that. But if we know what the barriers are, we'll do our best to meet with them. But the phone is a tricky one. Yeah. Protects, obviously.
Is your hand up, Adam?
Yeah, sorry, it kind of matches my background a little bit there. Yeah, just thinking back to like clients in court when, you know, I'm sitting back in the pews just absorbing, you know, what the charges are, what's going on during their arraignment. The judge asks, you know, please check in with pretrial services. And then the person walks out the door and they're just kind of awash with emotion and like what's going on. And it's kind of requires that hand holding. So I do see exactly what Jake has mentioned is this lack of, you know, follow through right afterwards to make that initial contact. And I've noticed with the clients that I've worked with in lead is just, they needed that reminder because they might have just totally missed. They don't even know what pretrial services is. And yeah, so it's kind of like hand holding, just somebody being there with you to walk alongside you through that process. That has seemed to have bridged that gap, or yeah, just overcome that barrier with a lot of the clients that we've worked with. Just somebody there to say, I'm going to walk you from this door to here. That's what the judge said. Otherwise, it's just back to survival brain. And it's like, what do I need to do to eat and survive today? So that might be, I don't know how pretrial services could, maybe an outreach person in the court to guide somebody over there, but especially if somebody's dealing with substance use, mental health, you know, lack of attention, those things will affect that.
That makes sense. And we've only got one Alan, so you know, there are questions about his availability, but that may be a further indication that more cooperation between, not just cooperation between, but similarity of services offered by pretrial services and lead or other pretrial programs we might be able to use people more efficiently, both to give that helping hand after a hearing and to be the backup in the office that's, you know, running down information. We may be able to get more efficiencies from the existing programs. Carol, did you want to jump in?
I was just wondering, when we have data about success or failure on pretrial, how much information is available about what kinds of failures we're seeing, whether that's a failure to appear in court or whether it's new criminal charges? And then I'm also wondering, is it possible to know at what point in the process failure is occurring? Like how many people are simply never ever making it in the door once to pretrial services and disappearing after their first appearance, versus how many people have, you know, had full compliance for 6 months and then something falls apart? I'm just curious, any information that might be available.
Andrew, do you want to address that?
Oh, I can address the first part, certainly. So yes, Carol, to answer your question, we'll be able to know, you know, not only whether it was a new offense or a failure to appear, but the type of new offense it was, whether it was a misdemeanor, felony, violent crime, violent felony. With the warrants, you know, it depends on if a warrant was issued, obviously, but you know, assuming that those are all recorded correctly, then yeah, we'd be able to tell that as well. As to their, I guess, compliance or participation in the pretrial process, you know, that would have to rely on Alan and a database. And I don't know if that's even set up to, or how well it's set up to record that. You can speak to that better, maybe.
I'd have to look into that, Andrew. I don't know how well it is set up for that too. And to be quite frank, I don't have a lot of people that have been referred to me to track that exact statistic. I'm working on, like I said, caseload of 58, I think I said. So a very small caseload, where 2 years ago it was think I was over 300 between John and I. And so, I think you're already tracking the data on those previous people I've had on pretrial. A lot of the pretrial people I have now on my caseload, that is, have been on the caseload for quite a while.
I think that gives us the direction we need for next month. Andrew, the information you're going to be giving us is really pretty critical to the decisions that we'll make next month. But as long as you're comfortable getting that information out in about 3 weeks so that we all have, a week to absorb it and think about it, then I think we can plan for a pretty specific review of numbers at our next meeting. You're on board with that, Andrew?
Yeah, sounds fine to me. I'll keep everyone aware as things progress.
Okay, and Jill, are you with us?
Yes, I'm here.
Good. Hi.
Hi.
Nice to hear you, if not see you. Just wanted you to be aware that we'll be getting what could be fairly extensive information from Andrew, and rather than having him try to get it out to the whole group, I think I'll ask him to get it to you, Jill, and ask you to be a quick turnaround in preparation for our June meeting. Is that workable for you?
It is. I can do that.
All right. You are so competent. You
Thank you.
take care of so many things. Okay. Our next meeting is going to be Friday. Is that June 2nd? I think it is. Yeah.
June 2nd, yes.
I'm going to attend that meeting by Zoom. It's going to be a little weird because I'm going to be in New Hampshire at my sister's house, helping her recover from some surgery. But it ought to work out fine, and I ought to be able to get Andrew's information through the wonders of the internet, and have it all be as prepared as everybody else for our meeting on the 2nd. Does anybody have anything further for us to talk about that we need to address before we adjourn our meeting?
We need to do public comments.
I'm getting better at remembering this. I remembered it after I spoke. Do we have any members of the public here with us who'd like to give us any input or make any comments?
We do have one hand raised, and also Adam has his hand raised.
Yes, I just noticed. Adam, go ahead.
Yeah, and just really quick, I was wondering, do people who get a score through the tool, the assessment tool, do they have access to that assessment after it is completed? Like, is that score available to them if they requested it?
I imagine, because it's available to their lawyers.
Okay, that's
So the lawyers should have it for their files.
okay.
Dave, do you want to weigh in on that, Dave Freeman?
That's exactly what I was going to say. The attorneys are provided with it, so.
And Adam, I'll say that the scoring and the weighting of all the instrument is online. It's it's transparent. So anybody should, if they know their criminal history or their lawyer that can see their criminal history, should be able to go in and do the scoring themselves. They need to.
Okay. Jill, do you want to take it over and open our meeting to public comment?
Yes, we have one person with a hand raised, Rupert Ayton. Go ahead and speak.
Thank you. My name is Rupert Ayton. I'm a Bellingham homeowner. I'm also a member of the Bellingham Unitarian Fellowship, and we have a working group there that gets together called the Black Lives Matter Action Ministry Team, which is a little bit of a catch-all for issues around anti-racism, anti-oppression, and multiculturalism. And one of the issues that has come up is the inequity of cash bail system, I guess, to put it simply. And there seems to be a lot of misinformation floating around and a lot of emotion around bail and jail and pretrial. And so I am slowly trying to educate myself on the system, if you will, and find experts to help educate our group. Adam, we did have Maura Christensen come and talk to us last month That was very educational. Jake, we're going to have the Friendship Diversion Services folks talk to us in a couple of weeks to understand that. But I think the question here, and please point me to past videos of past discussions or other information. I think a lot of people throw out numbers emotionally around, for lack of a better word, incarceration rates. And I know I'm not using this technically correctly, and race and what have you, but I would be really interested in knowing where I can actually see those numbers. It is really frustrating to hear individuals get up and speak about inequities without pointing to the source of data. Councilmember Buchanan, you were at the talk the other month with Andrew Redding. I found that really frustrating because there was a lot of emotion and I guess a lot of claims made, but where's the data? And I think that's one of the most important things is transparency, getting data out there. Alan Epps, I have looked a little bit at pretrial services. You guys have sent me some information. You've sent me the model. And Andrew Peterson, I'm really interested in the numbers that you come up with. And I would hope that that would be made publicly available in a relatively short period of time. Adam, your numbers, again, I would love to see those numbers so that we have some transparency. We actually know what we're dealing with. I think the other thing that has been thrown out there that I asked the group is there's been an accusation that this is all about money and follow the money and you can tell how the system works. And I wonder if there is publicly available information that really talks about the economics of our judicial system in the county here, as to what are the revenues that come in, what are the expenses that go out. And I kind of put that out there as a question for all of you. And I guess the other question, I thought it was really good that you distinguished the prosecutor from pretrial services. And one of the things that I think our group would like to do is be one of those groups that serenades the prosecutor or the county council, I guess, or I guess it's the voters about potential inequities in arrest and so on. But you know, how do we get past that? How do we change it at the prosecution level, I guess, is the question. And I'm sorry, I'm a layperson. I don't really understand. I'm trying to educate myself here, but those are kind of the questions I have. If there are resources that you can point me to, and I will watch the past videos of meetings because I think there's some good information there. But if there are resources or ways that this information can be made transparent or available, I would very much appreciate it.
Well, that's a tall order. A couple of things, it seems to me. Our court administrator, Dave Reynolds, is not with us today, but he has a fair, he's the Superior Court administrator, so he has access to information about the numbers of cases, those kinds of things. Dr. Peterson, Andrew Peterson, who is with us today, has been working for some time to amass statistics about people's success and failure at pretrial services. And those statistics we're going to be getting a lot of that information, as you heard during the meeting, within the next couple of weeks to discuss at our next meeting, which is going to be on June 2nd. Certainly the prosecutor's office can be contacted, and citizens can talk to prosecutors about prosecutorial decisions that are being made. The law gives discretion to decide who to charge and what to charge them with solely to the prosecutor. That's not something that courts and judges can affect. They simply handle the cases that come into the court. And with that little speech, I'm going to stop. I see two hands up, Andrews and Jills, and I'm sorry, Adams and Jills. And Adam, did you want to add to that?
Just as far as distributing information, because I'm not sure how to get in touch with you Rupert, but I'll definitely, I can send information and links to Stephen to distribute that. If anybody else wants to be linked in on that stuff, just please email me and let me know. But some resources if people are looking for information. I mean, I just go through reports. The Whatcom County website does a great job of tracking yearly different crimes, common crimes over the last 2 years. The Whatcom County Coalition to End Homelessness, their annual reports are really good to track homelessness and rates and disparities there. Also, the National Alliance to End Homelessness has some statewide and national information. So those are just a few of the resources I could easily pull up right now during the meeting. So if anybody wanted to look into some numbers off the bat, those are good places to start. And then from there, you can piece together the disparity is pretty clear and stated very clearly in those reports. So
Thank you, Adam. And Jill?
Thank you. I just wanted to let everyone know that bail is the topic, the agenda item, main topic next week at the Legal and Justice Systems Subcommittee. That's on Tuesday, beginning at 11:30. So I just wanted to make you all aware that that issue is going to be discussed next week.
Can you repeat the time for the meeting?
Yes, it's Tuesday, May 9th, 11:30 to 12:30. And that information is posted on the website for the task force, specifically the Legal and Justice Systems Committee. And I can email all that out to you if you want.
Yeah, I'd be interested in that. And Mr. Ayton, I don't know if Mr. Ayton is still with us, but if he is, I'd really urge him to consider attending that meeting. Unfortunately, I can't attend that meeting, and I haven't been asked to attend it. So Stephen, you'll be there, so our work group will be represented. Yeah. Okay, good. Anything further before we revisit these issues in 4 weeks' time?
We do have one other attendee today. If you'd like to speak to the task force, please virtually raise your hand now. And no more hands are raised. Thank you, everyone.
Okay, I think that finishes our meeting then. Thank you to all of you for attending. And I'll look forward to seeing all of you in 4 weeks' time. Okay.